Natasha, and thank you so much for joining me today. Well, I will admit that I was about 1 second from throwing these beautiful scraps in the bin because I had done so much die cutting and I had all of these scraps of the frames only. I had one center and all of these frames which were extra to what I needed, and these came from the Penny Black Creative Dies, the Hexagon set. Hexagon frames, they cut out the inside and they cut out the frame that go around them. These are a really old set. They are still available and they have been absolutely wonderful. As I said, I was using them for a project, so that's a good start because I was using them, but I created all of these frames and I actually tossed them in my paper bin and then was like, wait a minute, I know I can do something. So I'm like, right, let's set two. Sometimes it's about even those things that we just didn't have an idea for right now. Actually, let's use them. Let's get them off our plate so that they don't just sit in a scrap bin somewhere and we can make something happen. And in fact, I'm going to make 2 cards out of these today. Now, the first one, I ended up having 8 of this size, the exact same size. And so for me, I was like, right, well, I got to double them up somehow. That feels like the number's just talking to me. So I decided to gold emboss 4 of them. The other 4 would be used as layers to build layers, but I just knew that I needed 4 of these, and so I'm going to emboss them. I'm just using some gorgeous Ranger gold embossing powder. I use the super fine one, that way I can do really fine line images, but I can also get a really solid emboss if I need to. And then I am going to layer these up. But first of all, I do want to get some placement of how these are going to go. And I knew that I was going to cut down a piece of cardstock. So at the moment, this is cut to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And I'm just going to lay them out on here somewhere. Now, I do think that this layout kind of came to me quite easily because of this shape, because they are hexagons. But I must say, I mean, you could do this with rectangles, you could do this with circles, you could do this with squares, and I guess my idea was to have them laid out on the cardstock but not fill in all of the gaps and sort of have some space too. And I started with this, and really it's about having a play around. I quite like this, I quite like it over here as well. I mean, both sort of work well. Anyhow, sometimes it's best not to think for too long, and that is what I find that works best for me. Sometimes once I find something I'm relatively happy with, I go with it and then I'll make decisions as I need to. So I decide to glue down the first layer. Now, a couple of things here. One, yes, I haven't done any stamping or anything yet. That is a little bit risky, but I knew that I was going to cover these up, remember? So I've got the gold ones that I'm going to pop on top of this. So if any of the stamping accidentally got in the wrong place, it would essentially be covered up, and I was fairly confident with that. Just to get the level, make sure that they were relatively even and level across the top and the bottom. I started with that bottom left hexagon and then moved my way across. Now, they're not perfectly even, but they're eyeball even, and that's okay with me. And then I just went with this layout before I changed my mind at all. Now, here is time for the stamping. Now, this stamp set here is called Love and Hugs from Gina K. I have used this quite a few times before, but for this one, I really want those gorgeous little plants and vases, except I really want them to be all single and apart. So close your eyes if this bit hurts a little bit, but I promise it's going to be okay, and we would rather use our supplies, but I'm going to cut these apart. And I like the idea of all of these. I like them all together, and I find that I can pop these back together on an acrylic block, or I can pop them back together on a stamping platform lid just as easily to use them as intended as I can, pulling them all apart, and I'm able to get that individual look, and therefore kind of really extending the use of the stamp. So I was really happy with the way this turned out. Obviously, this is a really I guess it's a pretty simple layout, but a really striking card. I love this card and definitely wouldn't hesitate to repeat this and create some more of this in the future. And when I was flicking through sentiments, I really wanted to find a sentiment that was of the same nature as the fine line artwork of the plants, if that makes sense. So I went with this one here from the Gentle Silhouettes. I just think it goes nicely. It's got sort of that sort of scripty fine line writing, and I think that works really well with these gorgeous plants. Now, I am going to use sort of 4 different ones here. I'm using 1 each in these larger ones, and then I'm actually going to sneak 2 into that other little hexagon up there, 2 of these smaller ones. And I think, how good does this look, even just like this? And you would not tell that those were, you know, the original placement of all of those different stamps that were all joined together. And of course you could do some selective masking and things to get those individual ones, but honestly that felt a little too tricky for me. It was just going to be so much masking and so much mint tape or masking paper or whatever, and it was just really very simple to cut them apart and then stamp them individually. So I was happy with the result. At this point, I am going to glue on that final top layer. So there's only 2 layers. It's not super dimensional. It's just regular cardstock. It is 110 pound cardstock. So I would say, I mean, it has a tiny bit of dimension, maybe between 1 and 2 millimeters. Not too much at all. Definitely didn't feel very dimensional, but just felt like there was a nice obvious frame going around. Now I cut off all these extra bits here, and that is when I felt like I just wanted an extra little bit of frame to go around that entire panel, and so I will create that. I've cut a white panel ever so slightly bigger than the 3 3/4 by 5 inch that we have, just a tad bigger, and then use the same VersaMark to pop some sticky embossing ink around the outside. Use the exact same embossing powder, because even though I think I could probably dig out some gold cardstock, often I find the golds don't match perfectly, and so for me, if I've used the gold embossing powder, it's just as easy to use gold embossing powder to create a little border around the outside too. So I go ahead and melt all of that, and then I will mount the card front panel onto this. Basically it's just a matting layer. I also pop on a little bit of double-sided tape on there just so that it really grabs hold, and then the glue will dry as well. And then you can see that there is about, the frame around the outside is probably the same thickness-ish as with the frame that goes to become the matting layer. Then I did use some foam tape here, because this is just going to be popping this up on my 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base. And no little embellishments with this one. I feel like the gold catches your eye enough. Really, really simple, but really stunning. So glad that I made the effort to try and use up those scraps, and this is what we came up with. So let's move on to the second one. The second one is going to it's a little bit different direction than the first one, but that's okay, because that's what it is about, using these things up. Now of course these 2 match. They came from each other. This was a spare, it was a leftover. Would it be just as easy to throw this in the rubbish bin? Yes. And as I said, I did pop them in my paper bin, in my recycling bin, and I was like, no, I can't. And then I was like, actually, I can. What is actually stopping me? I can. We can do this. Then for this one, I really want the candles, because I had a sentiment in mind that I really wanted to use, and I knew I wanted candles. I was thinking about making my own, or I did actually search and see to see if I had a stencil. I don't have any stencils, but that might be on a list of what my wants are. But for the minute, I really want to use this sentiment, and so I have got from that double stitch rectangle set, I die cut out all of those candles and the little flames that go at the top. Now, would it be just as easy to make your own? Probably. You absolutely could. You could just do the rectangles for the candle, and then you could even just draw on the little flame part. That would be super, super simple. As I said, since I have these ones, I'll use them. The sentiment says the more candles, the bigger the wish. And so I quite like that. I feel like that's a really versatile sentiment. And it could be for any gender and almost any age. So I do love those ones occasionally. I find that they really go from my stash quickly, because people love to have a card on hand. And when that card can also be really versatile, then of course that's what they're going to lean towards. I am going to use my Spectrum Noir alcohol markers for these ones, just super quick. You could use anything. You could use your watercolor markers, my Ultra watercolor markers. I could have used those and then just chosen a different color fine tip to do the details on them. Really, I'm just adding in a base layer. There is just no good reason why I'm using alcohol markers, just because they're handy and because I've got a light, a medium, and a dark. So I use the light version of the color for the base color of the candle, and then to create the detail, I'm just going to use the dark color. So super simple, but as I said, it would be just as easy to find any matching, couple of pens that you have in your stash. Even kids' felts are going to work for this one. Nothing too special. I just am doing some patterns off the top of my head, some stripes, some dots, some sort of wavy zigzags, some crisscross patterns, all those sort of regular patterns that I see on candles here. As I said, these are basically just tone on tone, and I've got sort of more of a greeny teal color, I would say, and then definitely more of a blue color. So that was my plan anyhow. I've made about 7 or 8 of these. I wasn't sure quite how many I would fit on the card, and for this one, it's sort of not about the candle's number. I'm really just going to fill them up sort of nice and wonky down the bottom of the design. Now, as for the flames, I didn't really have a plan here, but I did know that my coloring didn't have to be super perfect because I was going to add something on top that would disguise any of the finer features that I needed to worry about in my colouring. So really just orange and yellow, and I sort of blended them together, sort of put the orange a little bit up, but honestly it didn't really matter at all. And so my blending here, nothing to write home about. Definitely nothing that there was skill or technique to. Now I do want to say again at this point that you don't have to have these shapes for creating really either of these cards. Actually, this one in particular, this is going to work perfectly fine if you just had a square and then you want to cut a second square and you can make that a matting layer. Absolutely fine. You can do this with a rectangle. You could, if you had like those stitch ties where you wanted to do some of the stitching on the outside of the rectangles, that would look fabulous too. You could do your own wonky lines border around the rectangles. That would look beautiful. It's more about the idea of sometimes just slowing down and remembering that we actually can use these things. We have paid for them. I've paid for the paper, and albeit it's just paper, we can make it work. We may as well use them. It's the joy of card making rather than trying to speed through to get to the next technique or the next thing. I just want to slow down and enjoy what I enjoy about card making, essentially. Really using what I have and trying to challenge my brain to use them in different ways as well. So I have put a little bit of foam tape on the back of each one of these candles, and then I pop them down in kind of like a wonky fashion, I would say. Wonky always seems easier to me than having to line them up perfectly, so I went with that one today. And then as for all of the flames, I am going to pop these on wonky too, partially because that's how the candles are, but also because they don't fit perfectly underneath the words. There is actually 2 different sizes of flames, and I have used a little bit of both. And no rhyme or reason as to how I'm putting them down, but also, as I said, I quite like the idea of the wonky. It just makes it seem easier than having to try and get them nice and straight. And I have put these down with no foam tape behind them for a couple of reasons. One, as I mentioned, we're going to do one further step than this to make them look a little bit, stepped up. And then 2, because they are small and it's fiddly to pop the foam down behind them. So, make life easier for ourselves. Now at this point, I am going to pop the main bit aside, and this frame was going to sink into the background a little too much for my liking. I could have made it gold, but I'm actually going to go with a classic black. This is just a Sharpie pen that I am using, and I am just scribbling around the outside. And then once I've done the kind of like the top of the frame, actually take a minute to just sort of swish your pen around the outsides and get the outside of the frame so that it almost looks like there is a black core to this. I just find that it's these wee finishing touches that really finish off the card, and then that way you can really, you can't see any white, and so it's really nice and crisp black colour. Then this is down onto my card front. I've got a slightly bigger piece down here. I will pop the black frame. If you're not confident, then at this point you should pop your the inner part into it, and then that way you can make sure the frame is nice and even and perfect. I'm going to pop a little bit of foam tape on the back of this piece and then pop this down onto my card front panel again. Make sure there's no other little extra bits and pieces that are clinging on there. And you can see the frame is pretty good. It matches the black of the stamping. It's nice and dimensional. And then I'm going to pop this down onto my 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base. As I said, these cards end up being really different, even though the original hexagons obviously came from the same set. But I both like them in really different ways. nice. And then this is the diamond stickles, and I love this. This is going to create that shimmery look on the flame part. You could also use something like glossy accents that would look beautiful here. You could put a little bit of glitter in it too, that would also look stunning. But when these catch the light, this is very dimensional and it's very shiny. So I absolutely love this little look for the candles, and I love that I was finally able to use that sentiment, which I've been wanting to use for ages. So 2 very different cards. We've used up those scraps and I feel good about it, and I enjoyed the process. So I hope that you have enjoyed the process with me too. Here are some finished photos, and of course at the end of this video YouTube will have some more suggestions that they think you would like as well. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next time.